Hello and welcome to what will be a little bit of an exploration of covering techniques. Now, I've been trying to find out a cost-effective way to cover models for some time now, and it started with a large Junkmeister build, and the cost of covering that in commercially available fabric iron-on covering would have been exorbitant. It would have taken the better part, I think, of about 6 rolls to cover the model, because it was a large 1/4 scale aircraft. And I'm not prepared, one, to pay that sort of money for covering, sometimes exceeding the cost of the model by a substantial margin. And secondly, its availability. It's just difficult to get your hands on unless you're going to buy the only available covering, Oritex. And as I say, you know, everybody's got their own limits, and I'm just not prepared to pay that sort of money. So I have experimented, and I've used dressmaking lining, and you can see here, this is a wing surface for the current DR1 that's covered in 100% polyester, which I'm using here just the plain white, but it is available in 40-50 different shades I've seen. It weighs about 70 grams unpainted per square metre, which is quite favourable when compared to something like Oritex or Solartex if you can get it, which weighs between, I've seen figures between 90 and 120 depending on the colour. So obviously that's just been shrunk, it hasn't been doped. I'm going to show you how I prep for that today on some smaller surfaces, and I'm also going to show you what I think I'm going to use for my smaller to middle range models in terms of size. Excuse me while I put that down. And that is, I'm going to use silk and tissue. Now there's a rudder that I've already covered in tissue, and I'll go through that process with some of these smaller parts. And the tissue basically acts as a carrier for the silk. And the silk I'm going to use, I've obtained in the UK from a company called Rainbow Silks, rather aptly. And it's the cheapest silk that they do. They're a specialist dealer, not for model use, but mainly for fabric and textile work. This is called Pongy 5. It's a strange name, but it's extremely light. I've weighed it, and it weighs in, I've weighed this whole bag here, and it comes out at 18 grams per square metre. I think that by that weight you can understand that it was used by the free flight scale boys and girls in the days gone by, because it's a really light alternative. And I'm going to show you how I prep that. So, what do we need for the prepping of both techniques? In the case of the dress lining, the first thing I do is I paint the surfaces with some Mod Podge. And I got a good deal on this. It goes a long way. Mod Podge is basically a water-based white glue. So other glues would work just as well. I just like the consistency of this and the way it goes on and its adhesion. This is a gloss finish. It comes in matte. It doesn't really matter. It's used in all kinds of art applications. I know some people have used Gorilla Glue and other brands of PVA. I'm sure would work just as well. And the first stage is to paint the surface that you're going to be adhering to with the Mod Podge. And I've done that here on this rudder. That's had a couple of coats, a light sand on after the first coat, which just tends to get soaked into the wood. And it adds substantially to the strength of the part actually. And then a second coat. Now that's well dry. It was done yesterday. And I know now that when I put the covering on, the dress lining, and I apply heat, that will reactivate the glue and it'll really bond rather well, and we'll look at that. In the case of making the model for lighter to middleweight models, the first stage before I apply the tissue is to dope around the edges of where you want the tissue to glue to. So I've got some fairly strong, it's got a little bit of dilution, dope, non-shrinking dope, it doesn't really matter, and I'm going to apply that around the edge where I want the tissue to adhere to. And in a similar manner, this time it won't be heat that I'm going to be using. When I actually glue the tissue down to the edge, I'll reactivate it with some thinned down, or even full strength would probably work, but some more dope, which will activate this layer of dope underneath. So I'm just putting the glue, in this case dope, wherever I want the tissue to stick to. Notice I don't put it on the ribs. I don't need it to work on the ribs. I just want the fabric to stretch over the top. Now you may have seen another video which it was basically an excuse to explore a fellow modeller's den, Alan, smash and chop, very helpful, prolific modeller, and I thought it was a nice opportunity to show him using the technique, but also to have a look around his workshop, which is always fun. So I've done one side, I'll put it to one side, I have to flick it over and do the other, and it's always worthwhile if you're doing this to be in a well ventilated room. So I've got the window open, but if you don't want the smell of this stuff to permeate through the house, make sure all the doors are shut to areas where normal human beings live, because you'll drive them crazy with this. It's a really toxic sort of smell. I do understand it's difficult to get in some countries. I may be wrong in that, but I have read somewhere that some people find it difficult to get their hands on this stuff, which is a shame. But I'm sure there are alternatives that aren't as toxic or horrid. I've never used the Easy Line water-based dopes. I can't attest to what they work like, but I've got quite a bit of this left over from other projects, so this is what I'm going to use. I'm fortunate that my wife doesn't particularly mind the smell, but I have heard some of the lads who've used this facing their divorce proceedings because of it, so be careful if you're using this at all in any domestic environment. You're probably asking for trouble. That's dried already. Flick it over. Now hopefully this is going to provide a nice finish, because the last time I tried this, it all went well with that particular covering I had. It was just stuff that I picked up at a swap meet, and I thought, oh, this is going to cover a model great. I got it for next to nothing. This is great. It went on well. Coverite it was. Went on really well, shrunk really well, or at least I thought it had. But when it was left, in very short order, when I had applied the paint to it, when I came back a couple of days later, it was sagging all over the place. I tried to apply heat to it. The sag came out, but came back in straight away. Somebody did say to me, I mean, I haven't got any more Coverite left, but somebody did say to me that it can happen if you have too much heat initially. It's just enough to get it to shrink and no more. But I'm not in a position to try it again, and I'd be very reluctant to risk using it again and risk a project for the sake of that. I was fortunate that it came off not too Wasn't too bad in getting it off. I didn't wreck the model. I broke the fin off, which was about the only damage that I did, and I had to do a little bit of repair work on that, but I got away with it really. It didn't rip the model apart. I would have been devastated if it had. It's still on the fuselage. It's not brilliant. It's got a little bit of a sag in places on the fuselage, which, to be honest with you, I don't think that looks too bad. It looks very prototypical actually. So I think I can live with that. But the tail surfaces and the wings just looked awful in my eyes. I'm getting high as a kite with this. I can tell straight away how toxic it is. So I'll quickly get this on, get the lid on, get all the doors opened wide, get the fumes out, and then we'll apply some tissue, which hopefully is a less toxic procedure. So I'm basically going around the edges wherever I want the tissue to stick. And the tissue I'm using is lightweight tissue that I've just found in various places around my stash of old kits. But you can buy tissue very cheaply. So that's not going to be a difficulty in sourcing. So we'll pause it there. I'll get a breath of fresh air, get the lid on this, and then we'll look at the next stage. Time to start covering this. So the first thing is to cut some tissue to size, and by to size I mean leave a generous amount, because you're going to be manhandling this tissue initially and you need to be able to get a hold of it. So put that on one side, and with all covering of course you start with the lower surface first. Now the tissue as it is, you need to wet it, and this tissue will actually handle being a little wet. It doesn't need to be sopping wet, but it does need to be wet. So I'm just going to give it a light misting from a spray bottle, and then place it on. And what I'm going to do is dope through the tissue, and the general rule always is long axes first. So I'll apply some to one side here and make sure that it's got a little bit of tension in it, pull it taut, a little bit there, get that side glued down. And I'm pushing through the dope, and then some in the middle, and I'm pulling it. There you go, so there's a little bit of tension in it. Now I'm doing this indoors. I'll get away with it, I'm sure. But seriously, when it comes to using this stuff, it's not nice, and I wouldn't dream of doing a large surface like a wing indoors, because it's a large volume of fumes being produced, large quantity of fumes being produced. It's a sort of job to do outside, and that obviously is weather determinant. Not that it's an issue this, because I'm not going to go for a dope finish but dope doesn't like moisture, and if you were going for a colour finish with any dope, and let's say you were putting some trim on a model, it will bloom. You get like a white bloom across it if there's too much moisture in the air, so it's something to be avoided. So you pick your moments when it comes to doping, it seems. And I'm just sealing it around all the way around the edge. This stuff goes off very, very quickly, and the tissue is forming a bond with the dope that was already laid on to prep the surface from before. Where we're coming to an all wood surface, I want that bound. Now the purpose of the tissue, as I've already said, is to act as a carrier for the silk, because the silk, even though this particular batch that I have here seems to have quite a tight weave, it would take an awful lot of filling with dope if it was put straight onto the surface without anything underneath. And this will act as a barrier holding the dope to the frame much better. Now, simply a case of leaving that to dry, and when it dries it'll go tight. You can speed it up a little by applying a little bit of heat through a hairdryer if you wish. So we'll pause it there and then come back once it's dry and we'll start tidying this up. This is dried out now. I'll admit that I gave it a little bit of encouragement with the hairdryer. You don't need a paint stripper or a heat gun for that. It's just a gentle heat to dry off. And what I'm doing now, obviously, is to trim off some of this excess. So we don't want it all. And then I'm going to cut the edge and seal it over. Ready for the upper layer. Get rid of the scrap. Okay, so what I'll do is trim round here. I'm just putting some relief nicks in so that it folds neatly without forming creases. This is fairly pliable stuff. So I'll do that and then seal it over and do the other side. There's the tail surface tissued and it's about to be doped now. I've made a fairly weak mixture, 50-50, 60-40 sort of mix. And even I'm not crazy enough to do this indoors, so I'm going to take it outside and paint it on, and for that you need to have a soft broad brush. I've got some cheap brushes here from a hobbycraft store, and I'll use that to do the job. Putting it on quickly, soft brush so I don't force the tissue. You don't want a hard brush to do this, and it's a quick motion. I'll be painting it on like that, but I'll be doing it outside. So in from the cold, that's now been covered, doped, 2 coats of thin down dope, and that's ready, hopefully, for the next part of the process. Time for the silk. I'm ready now to try the silk for the first time. I've taken Alan Brown's advice and I've made a fairly weak mixture of wallpaper paste up, and I've got a nice decent sized brush. Biggest one that will fit in the jar was what he said, and here goes. Starting in the centre I think makes sense. and spreading it out. The idea, of course, is to keep the silk in contact with the tissue underneath. And then when this dries, it'll be doped straight away, immediately. Now Alan let his dry naturally, but he did say it can be dried with a dryer, hair dryer, and that's actually what I'm going to try and do, just to see what happens. I think it's going through there into the tissue underneath, which I didn't necessarily want, but there it goes. Let's see what happens if I put the dryer on it. Just realised what he did say was to take the excess off, wasn't it? In fairness, I don't think I've put as much on as Alan did. Let's see how it goes. You can see some of the glue beading up under the surface, which obviously we need to get rid of. Drying from the centre and working out. He did say if it goes wrong you can just peel it off. We'll see. I'm going to give it a little bit more heat and then I'm going to leave it and we'll see what it's like when it's dried. There we have it. That's very, very impressive. It's a beautiful finish. And the advice is get some dope on it now straight away. So that's exactly what I'll do. Seal it round here, get some dope on and then trim it round. Then we'll do the other side. You can see there the quality of the finish. Now I've cut round the edge using crimping scissors. They're actually scale crimping scissors. I've never used them before, but they give a nice edge which seems to stop the silk from fraying. So I'm going to cover the other side before I dope this, although I've sealed all the way around here with full strength dope. I'll finish that off and repeat the process on the other side, and then we'll apply some dope and we'll see what it looks like. That's it then. That's covered with the silk. It's important to keep the silk as taut as you can in the wallpapering stage. That's had 2 coats of thin down dope and I'm really happy with it. That's a lovely finish, nice and smooth, very, very fine grained, much finer than Oritex or Solatex. The weave is very, very fine indeed. So these sort of fluffy edges, a bit of dope on there, let it dry and give it a sand down and you'll have a lovely smooth edge. So that's the technique that I'm going to be using on my medium to smaller size planes. And very briefly, because I've shown it a number of times, but just keeping them all together in one place in one video for people's reference, I'm going to use the polyester dress lining technique for a larger plane, the DR1 in this case, and I'll just demonstrate it on one of the smaller components. This is the third technique really, because we've done tissue and silk and tissue, and this one is the technique that I'm proposing to use on all my bigger models, because I've tried it a couple of times now. I'm quite happy with it, and that is using dress lining, polyurethane, polyester, 100%, and it's got shrinking properties. So what I've done, I've prepped this surface by using the Mod Podge, and by applying some heat to the cloth, as you can see already, you reactivate the glue and you adhere it to the surface. Of course, this has the added advantage, as I pointed out to somebody at the club, unlike commercial fabric coverings which have glue across the whole surface, well, because they need to, don't they? They don't know where you need to attach it. You're saving weight there. This stuff weighs in at approximately 70 grams per square metre, and I think that's quite favourable compared to the commercial coverings which are available. Now this is quite an awkward shape, obviously, isn't it? It's almost a circle, so the pulling it tight in all directions could be a bit awkward. I've only applied glue on the outer edges, not on the middle support pieces. And you can see it's adhering rather well to the surface, which is obviously what we want. And once I've applied it all the way around, I'll trim it, lap it round. I don't think I'll do both sides, but I'll explain how I would do them. And pull the creases out there. You see there's a couple of creases I'm not happy with. Pull those off. Get it round. Get it round now. Now I'm going to use the weight of the part, and there's quite a stretch in this. When I covered the Junkmeister, I was able to cover the whole fuselage in 2 pieces of material, which, if you look at the shape of a Junkmeister, I was quite shocked. I thought it was going to be made up of a number of components, but no, it wasn't. It was I managed to do it. It'll stretch quite well. I've got the temperature a little bit higher than you would normally use for commercial covering, I would say. A little bit higher. Go higher again, actually. And I'm trying to get it as tight as I can before I apply any heat with the gun, the heat gun. It's best not to have to rely too much on shrinkage, in my view. You can see it's going on really nicely there. I'm going to put a relief cut here, just so I can pull it round. Now, I was really concerned about whether this model was going to end up nose heavy. I've been sort of reassured now from lots of comments that that's very unlikely to be the case, even with a big Zenoa engine up front. But I thought if I covered the tail feathers and put them on, I could see what effect that was starting to have on the centre of gravity for the triplane. I'm just pulling it round, taking it round the corner, so to speak. Hope you can see that, how it's going on. and then this will be doped in the same way that I've doped the silk. The weave's quite fine, so I don't need to worry about having to put loads on to fill the weave. I think about 3 coats did it for me last time. And then once I've done all of this, I'll actually Mod Podge again around the edge so that the other layer, the other side that I put on, I've got glue to actually glue it to. I could do it with dope, but using the Mod Podge keeps it quite tidy. So I'll tidy this up with the crimping shears. I'll do the other side and then you'll see it when I finally apply the heat to it to shrink everything down. Both sides now covered. It's time to shrink the dress lining. I've sealed around the edge with some near to full strength dope, and when everything's doped that can be sanded down. I found that the crimping shears give a nice edge to it, so let's apply some heat and shrink this drum tight, ready for doping. There we have it. Done, ready to go onto the model. Really pleased with that. So it just needs to be doped. Same procedure as I've done with the silk. Thin down dope, and then we're ready to go. I hope that was useful. If you've enjoyed watching it, I hope you have. Please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and you'll see future adventures with this building project. Thanks for watching.